This is Moments of the Movement, Civil Rights and Change in America.
I'm Lonnie Bunch, founding director of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. Welcome to Moments of the Movement. Though we hear a lot about bombings and physical attacks, efforts to take down leaders of the American Civil Rights Movement came in many forms. The Reverend Joseph E. Lowery knows that all too well. He, along with Fred Shuttlesworth, Ralph Abernathy, and Solomon Say, was a defendant in the New York Times versus Sullivan. Though known widely as a case that defended liberty of the press, L.B. Sullivan, the Montgomery Police Commissioner, also sued Lowery and Company for defamation over the advertisement, "Heed Their Rising Voices." The full-page ad detailed ways in which authorities in the South terrorized nonviolent protesters. Here, Reverend Lowery talks about the case as it was argued before the Supreme Court and the unexpected fallout as a result.
Well, I went to Mobile, Alabama, to Warren Street Church in 1952, and the NAACP was holding its regular meetings in Warren Street, so I just jumped right in with them because we had not organized SCLC at the time. SCLC came into being in the latter part of the 50s, following the Montgomery boycott. But the NAACP was active, and as I said, they met in Warren Street Church, usually on Sunday afternoon. And so I had already been active in the NAACP in earlier years, and so it was just a natural for me to join with them. And we engaged in voter registration and in educational activities designed to help African Americans understand our predicament and how it was incumbent upon us to find a way out. And it was an interesting journey. The NAACP was headed by a man named John LaFleur, who was active in Mobile. And until my arrival, I don't guess John had any competition for activism in the city. He and I became friends, and then later the friendship experienced a meltdown as we sort of went our separate ways in terms of activism. John was a typical NAACP and a great person, but his forte and his probably the maximus of his activism was filing suits and writing up complaints and protests against what happened. But Mobile was an interesting town. It was racist, but not the same toxic racism that you found in Birmingham and Montgomery. So that even during later years when the movement became prominent and active, you didn't read as much about Mobile as you did Montgomery and Birmingham, because Mobile was, in many instances, quietly effecting change, and there had to be an occasional explosion of activism to keep them honest. But Mobile had some interesting leadership. A guy named Joe Langan, who was a Roman Catholic, was a city commissioner. And he was a man with a warm heart and did not have the cold and icy stare of the heart toward the black community. And so in many instances, we were able to achieve change without the disruption of the community that we had to have later to achieve even more drastic change. But Mobile was sort of like a little New Orleans. As a matter of fact, the people in Mobile claim that the Mardi Gras was initiated in Mobile, not New Orleans. I never bothered to research that to decide where it come down. But Mobile, the Roman Catholic influence did not lend itself to activism in terms of change, social change, so that resolutions and lawsuits and that sort of thing, the main focus of the civil rights movement. And as the years progressed, activism progressed, and we moved away from just resolutions and statements and so forth to activism. I lived in Mobile. My home was in Huntsville, and I had inherited, my sister and I, some property from my father in Huntsville. And so we told our attorney, for God's sake, don't mention Huntsville, because we don't want them to be awakened to the possibility that they might take our property in Huntsville, as they did Abernathy. They took farmland from Abernathy, Marengo County. So the lawyers agreed they did not mention Huntsville. So when I got on the stand in Montgomery, they first asked me, where do you live? I said, 306 North Warren, Mobile. And where were you born? And I almost fainted because we had already agreed, but the lawyer forgot. He was following his routine questioning. And I guess my answer should have been Huntsville, but the Lord spoke to me. And my answer was Madison, because Huntsville was in Madison County. And there was a little town in Madison County named Madison, but I didn't say, I just said Madison. And so they never discovered the property that we had, which they would have seized as they did Abernathy in Marengo County, because they found out about his land. But that was an interesting suit when it was argued before the Supreme Court. One of the justices was Jewish, and the little lawyer, Nachman, who was representing the city of Montgomery, persecuting us. And the New York Times was sued along with the four of us, Abernathy, Shelterwood, Say, and myself. The New York Times would not let us be covered under their bond. They made what they call a supersedus bond, but they would not let us be protected under their bond. And their reason was that if they did, it would give them some stake in Alabama citizenship, and they could be subject to persecution by the Alabama authorities if they had any reason to claim Alabama. Well, they claimed they didn't belong to Alabama. Alabama authorities had no power to attach them. But it didn't help us that they took our property. And of course, the Supreme Court later reversed the lower courts. And in an argument before the Supreme Court, I was about to say what this lawyer named Nachman was asked by the justice. He said, you demanded that the defendants produce their property, and you kept. Sammy Davis had just married, I think her name was Mae Britt, a blue-eyed blonde, and the white folks in Alabama were very displeased with that. And Sammy Davis was on the list of citizens that sponsored the ad that gave them the right to sue in the first place. And when Nachman was making his summary to the jury, he said, you ministers were sitting there with an air of injured innocence. You were proud to be on the stand with Reinhold Niebuhr and Sammy Davis Jr. and with Harry Belafonte and Sammy Davis Jr. They called Sammy Davis' name every other name because that reminded the jurors that Sammy Davis had just married a blue-eyed blonde, and that was very, very unpleasant for the Alabama jurors. And so they didn't stay out very long. They went out and came back almost immediately, found us guilty, and took our property. But the Supreme Court later, of course, vindicated us, overruled the lower court, and when they sold Abernathy's car and Shuttleworth's car, and say they all got new cars, but my members were more astute. The Methodists boys, they went down to when they auctioned my car off in Mobile, my members went down and bid. They bid. I think they bought it for $800 or $900, and then they brought it and gave it to my wife. The fellow who did the bidding was a fellow named DeWitt, R.B. DeWitt, who was secretary of the YMCA, which was right across the street from our posses. And he bought it and brought it back and drove it in the yard and gave my wife the key, and she gave him $1. And of course the community raised the $800 or $900 and gave it back to DeWitt that he paid for the car. But I'm the only one who didn't get a new car. Well, the movement was evolutionary, although it seemed revolutionary at the time. But things changed considerably, and it became a worldwide movement. And it not only dealt with voter registration and public transportation, as it did in the beginning with buses, but it had to do with segregation as a whole. And public accommodations were significant. The court did rule clearly on public accommodations, and in '64, the courts made it very clear that segregation in public accommodation was unconstitutional, and that was a tremendous movement. I remember I was in Nashville in time, may have been '63 or first of '64, I've forgotten which, and we were demonstrating at various restaurants, and we were demonstrating in Morrison's was one of them. Morrison, which is out of business now, and I think they were bought out by Piccadilly. The fellow who owned Morrison's, I've forgotten, I think they were based in Mobile. And I was living in Nashville. I went to the governor of Tennessee and asked him to ask the president of Morrison to desegregate, and we could stop the demonstrations. And he called the head of Morrison's, and I was sitting in his office, and he told the head of Morrison, said, "I will never, over my dead body." And the Civil Rights Act took effect, I think, in July of '64. And the Morrison's was desegregated in July, and the president died a month later. So he was true to his word. He said it would be over his dead body that blacks would eat in Morrison's. He went on and died.
Oral histories were conducted by the Southern Oral History Program in the Center for the Study of the American South at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill on behalf of the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture and the Library of Congress. Moments of the Movement, Civil Rights, and Change in America comes to you from New Visions, New Voices, expanding the American conversation because it's time to hear the difference. With support from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Visit us online at newvisionsnewvoices.org.